ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Well, hello there, and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial video where we're taking a look at more about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these FileMaker videos over at my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we're taking a look at a very cool topic, and that is web scraping data. We're basically parsing the web into FileMaker Pro. Now, where this came about was I needed a particular chunk of data, and I couldn't find that data in a readily available format, so I needed to web scrape it. So that provided for this video. It is a great topic. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about. All right, so here's the file that we have on screen, one that I've built for you as a technique file. If you're a subscriber, you'll be able to download this file. What we're going to be doing is taking a walk through the process of what FileMaker provides in terms of web scraping and where you need to go when you need to go outside of FileMaker. And it's not truly outside of FileMaker. We're actually using plugins that tie into technologies that are outside of FileMaker but are readily available. Now here on screen, I have your standard web viewer. And what I have loaded is a Wikipedia article. And this is where it all started for me. I was creating a database solution where I needed zip code prefixes. Now don't confuse this with full zip codes. The USPS right here that we're taking a look at, the United States Postal Service, does provide web services that you're able to actually hook into in order to perform a zip code lookup. But in my particular case, I needed the zip code prefix. That is the 3-digit zip code that identifies predominantly what state this particular piece of mail is coming from. So the zip code breaks down into multiple pieces of information. So as you scroll down here, what we find on this Wikipedia page is we find a lot of information. In fact, it's probably the exact information that I want. Now, the one thing you have to be aware of is because Wikipedia is a publicly edited source for data, you can't really rely on its true authenticity. Although the authors and editors, they all do their best in order to have the most accurate information possible. But granted, I would probably want to go direct to the source, and that is to the United States Postal Service in order to get this information. But for this example, you notice that as I scroll here, we have a couple of different tables. We have all of the tables that start with 0, then we have all of the tables that start with 1, all the way down to those that start with 9. Now this is great, and it's a great visual presentation, but it's in a format that I can't really use. I can't import this right off the bat, which I would like to do. Now, typically on Wikipedia, you can scroll down to the bottom of a page, which I'll do here, and then you can actually see that there are references, and there's a 3-digit zip code prefix. Now, what we have loaded here in FileMaker within a web viewer is all accessible to us, and it's done with a couple of functions, and you can extract anything that you want out of the page, provided you know where to get at it and how to get at it. The unfortunate aspect about FileMaker is FileMaker doesn't support a very predominantly popular, although sometimes loved and not loved, it's not necessarily a language, but it's a format for extracting data which is called regular expressions. FileMaker really needs to have this built in my opinion. There is no other integrated development environment that I know about, no language on the face of the planet that I know about that doesn't have regular expressions or some form of pattern matching built in. FileMaker does have pattern matching in the form of its left, right, and middle functions, but regular expressions would be really easy to integrate, and I really wish they would. However, there are shortcomings with the web viewer in terms of interacting with the web. The web is predominantly run by JavaScript, meaning a lot of web pages are now single web pages, and they only load their content after you do certain things. In this case, this whole web page, all of the content that I would potentially want to access is right here in front of me. All of these tables are within the HTML that's on this page, and I get that content right away. How can I see this within FileMaker? Well, over here on the right-hand side, you can clearly see that I have calculation code right here. Now this calculation code, as I zoom in on it, is basically a FileMaker calculation that uses the getLayoutObject attribute. Now this web viewer right here, I've given this web viewer a name, and you do that in layout mode. So we'll go into layout mode, and I'll zoom back out. I'll select the web viewer right here, and then we can see when we select the Inspector tab, click on the position and zoom in here, we can see that I've given this particular layout object the name of WebView. That means that anything that is within this object, and it works for text objects and fields and other things, this particular function, but when I'm in browse mode, if I use this particular function, get layout object attribute, WebView, and specify the name of the object that I specified, WebView, then I'm going to be able to extract that. So I'll evaluate this, and we can see right here that I get all of my information that is the web page. That is inclusive of all of the tags and everything else that defines the structure of this data. The problem is, because FileMaker does not have pattern matching, or its pattern matching, I should say, is limited, I'm really not able to extract exactly what I want out of all of this. In particular, what I would want is just this code right here, the 000 or 001, and the name. And maybe I might want this additional piece, but for the purpose of this example, I really only wanted these two, the 3-digit prefix and the actual state. That's it. But grabbing that across all of these particular tables is really a bit of a hassle. It really can't be done very efficiently within FileMaker. So this is where we're going to set onto the path or onto the adventure of getting this data out or doing some web scraping. And there are manual ways of web scraping and there are automated ways. And as you're going to see, the automated way, which in this example I'm going to be using my Python script, down in a few minutes from now, or maybe a few 15 minutes from now, because we're going to look at the manual way, we're going to see that this can be extremely invigorating. It's really cool to be able to pull stuff off of the web and straight into FileMaker. So let's move on with the next process, which is manually getting at this data. Okay, so let's go through the manual process of how we would actually parse this data and make it so that we can import it into FileMaker. First and foremost, you need to know that anything and everything, Google does this, Yahoo does it, Microsoft does it with Bing, web scraping is the way of the web. If somebody has data and they've presented it publicly on the web, then scraping it is one of the ways that you can get at it. If it's not provided in a standard format, you of course need to get it some way. Now, the cool thing, most operating systems, this includes both Macintosh and Windows, your two popular, you can do it on Linux as well, but it depends. There are tools that people have built that you can put as an add-in to a browser, but the native browser that comes with the operating system, that's Safari for Macintosh or Internet Explorer for Windows, typically provides the ability to simply copy and paste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the content in this one table. I'm then going to right-click here and I'm going to copy this. Now when I copy it, it's been copied in multiple formats down to the clipboard. One of the formats that is recognized by particular applications is the table itself, the inherent HTML table. Now here in Safari, I'm going to right-click on this particular item, and I'm going to choose this option right here of Inspect Element. Now when I choose Inspect Element, many times you have to turn on a developer feature. You can see up here in the header area here that I have this Develop menu turned on in Safari. That's sometimes found in the settings or the preferences of the application. But as I cycle through all this content and as I move across them, you can see that over there on the left-hand side, as I'm moving across all of these table rows in this HTML, I would be able to copy and paste any one of these and copy just that particular object. So this whole table right here, I could very easily simply right-click here and say copy as HTML. I can then take that HTML. There are online converters that will convert that data for you. But for the most part, because I'm here in Safari, Safari is provided by Apple, and Apple also has a spreadsheet application called Numbers, I can, right within Safari, as I did previously, select all this content, right-click to copy, go over to Numbers, which is a spreadsheet, and this works exactly the same on Internet Explorer and Excel. I can create a new document, and I'll click Choose, and then I can simply paste. Now, when I paste, Numbers automatically remembers that that's in a table format, and it actually parses the HTML so that it can populate it into individual cells within numbers here for me. But this process can be extremely laborious and very manual, and we really don't want to do that, because in order for me to now export this, I have to do a lot of stuff. I have to basically go in and first off, I'd have to select all of these cells and then drag and move them out of the way, probably down here to this cell. And I have to do that multiple times here, now doing this next range, and then dragging it down below. Well, I've got to drag, and you can see already, it's just a pain in the patootie in order to do all of this, in order to just get all of these in one column. And I'm not even done yet. I now need to actually go in, edit this data, select this, get this over to here and paste this, maybe get rid of everything else that I want, and do that for each individual item. Who would ever want to do that? Nobody. I could, of course, once I've got all the data into a format that I want, I could go up to the file, I can do an export to, and I could export to our ever popular CSV, or comma separated value. Now that's all great. If it's a small amount of data, you can certainly copy and paste, but I highly suggest that you don't do that. Reason being is that this data is already in a pre-structured format. You just need to know what is that format, and once you've digested it, you can then parse all of the data out. In particular, what we have is we have one table right here, we have another table right here, and so on all the way down to number 9. More importantly, within this table, we have these HTML objects called table data. So when I click to inspect element, and as we already saw when I hovered over this, and it hovers over all of the individual tables and the table rows, within those table rows, we have this little TD element right here. You can see as it moves and highlights over there that this TD element is that's the smallest little unit that I actually want to be able to process. I want to process this TD unit, and I want to get out of it what that data is. I can see right here that that piece of information is right there, that 010. And it looks like what they've done is they accidentally or actually have an extra space. So I've got some cleanup that I'm also going to need to do on this particular item. But contained within this, I have an embedded link, which is this anchor tag right here, which actually includes the name of the state that I want, the MA. So there's a lot of things going on here in order for me to extract this data. But the key point here is that it's in a repetitive format. It's in a predictable format. It's in a format that if I understand how this is stored, I can actually get at this quite easily. And you're going to see how fun it is to get at this. We just have to go a little bit outside of FileMaker. So now that we've taken a look at this manual way of getting at this data, we can take a look at the basic way that we can get at data within FileMaker, and then we can go on and we can actually parse and process this out. And you can see how fast it is and how few lines of code it takes in order to get at all of this data. There is one thing that I want to mention just before we jump to that point. Remember that I mentioned that I probably would want to go directly to the source? Well, down here at the bottom where we had our 3-digit zip code prefix, this actually goes to the United States Postal Service. And if I click on that link or this page, which I have right here, yet again, we have an actual table object, which this probably would be pretty easy to clean up with FileMaker. I would simply select all of this data, scroll all the way bottom to the bottom. You can see that I made a selection first, and then scroll to the bottom. Actually, let's go ahead and go through this the fastest way possible. The fastest way is to simply highlight just a little portion, click, drag all the way to the bottom, hold down your Shift key, click and grab at the bottom of the table, copy that all, which I've just did with Command C or Control C, go over to your spreadsheet application, create your new window, choose, you're going to paste this typically in the header area. I'm going to paste that pasted right there. And then what I'm able to do is I'm able to shorten this table up because in numbers in particular, it wants to have all of those cells be represented just as much as what I need. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to add a row above, and I'm going to put in the prefix, and then I'm also going to put in, let's say, state. And we'll go ahead and get rid of these two columns. I'll right click here and I will delete those selected columns. And within a very quick amount of time, I have all of the data from the USPS and I'm able to import this. Now, this isn't the fun stuff that we're going to be doing with a little Python code, but from here, I would be able to export this as CSV. I would be able to go to next, and I would be able to call it import data.csv. And I'll save this right onto my desktop. And I'm pretty much going to be done with that data. In order to get this into FileMaker, if you don't already know, FileMaker by default supports dragging a CSV or an XLS or any of FileMaker's supported formats directly on the content or on the icon. So it's really easy to get things into FileMaker. We can take a look at that over here where I've got my desktop loaded and I've named that export data right there. All I have to do is drag this right on top of the FileMaker icon. Now I have the FileMaker icon there in my Finder window here, ready for me to drag. But no matter how you access the icon, you get this little dialog here that actually says the first row of data is commonly the column, so I can choose that it is field names. If it's not field names, I can have it be the data, and I just say OK, and I'm going to get this data really quickly here. So you can see going from that web page with a copy and paste, pasting into numbers, saving out as comma separated value, and then importing into FileMaker got me there extremely fast. I'm now ready to parse or manipulate this data, do whatever I want, remove these ins. I do have to do some work and extract out the states, but all of the states are 2 digits, so that's pretty easy to match with a pattern. Basically, this cleanup is not that much work and would probably be worth my time in order to do. But we want to make this even easier on ourselves. We want to go for the ultimate in automation. And that's what we're going to take a look at next. All right, so let's get into the guts of the ultimate of web scraping data and doing it straight into FileMaker. In this example, what I'm going to be doing is using a Python script with a plugin that unfortunately is only available on the Macintosh. But just before we do that, I want to make sure that you understand that when we use that getLayoutObject attribute, that if there's anything on the web that you want to get out of the web page that you're taking a look at, you're able to get at that provided you know how to actually write a calculation against it. This is a very common example right here, and I'm going to put this up on screen. Actually, let's go and use Text Wrangler right there. Create a new document, paste that, and we'll just make the text really big if we can. Nope, that won't work. I think it's that one. I don't know how to make the text bigger. We'll just zoom in on it. All right, here's what we've got. In this particular example, I'm using a let function, and I'm saying I want you to first define the content. What is the content? The content is going to come from that web view object. I'm going to grab the content out of it, and what I want to do is I want to identify my starting point and my ending point. Well, in HTML, that's extremely easy. Starting with a super simple example, I'm going to use the title tag. The title tag in this case is the, we'll see it when I get out of the code view here. It basically is what this title of this page is. But here you can see that I've created a variable called start value, a variable called end value. I know that I'm starting with title, and then I'm closing that HTML tag with the closing tag, which is identified with this backslash. Then I just need a starting and an ending point. And FileMaker's pattern matching pretty much boiled down to the left, right, and middle function. Unless you're dealing with values, then you have left values, right values, and middle values. In this case, we're going to be using 2 different position functions. The first is we need to know what is the position of my initial starting value. So you can see right here, I'm saying position, looking at the content, what is the start value, starting at the first instance that I see this, or starting where, and then starting at the first occurrence. So it's the occurrences or the start position that you're able to control. These two values allow you to control when and where you start. Now in this case, when I start across all of the HTML content, it's going to start right here at the beginning of the title. So what I need to do is I need to add the length of that title and make sure that I start at the end and start to grab from that point forward. So you can see over here as I scroll over, we've got this length start value. So I need to add however long this is to wherever it starts so that I start right here. Once I've done that, all of that code, I can then use the middle function. The end is really easy to get because I simply use the starting value or wherever I started in order to grab the content. So in other words, out of all of my content, rather than looking at the very start of the content again, I'm going to actually start from the point where I found my start in order to determine the end. And that's basically right here where I've controlled this value by supplying what I found as the start. Then the rest is really easy. Middle, start, content, etc. We don't need that code, and we'll say evaluate this code, and there you go. List of zip code prefixes. I just web scraped and parsed that out of the HTML content right into my FileMaker field. But the holy grail is I want to grab all of this data, and I want to do it so that I only get the pieces of data that I truly want to get. And in order to do that, we have to go outside of FileMaker. Now, when we go outside of FileMaker, we're not actually talking about not staying within FileMaker. We're talking about using a technology or a language that is not a FileMaker calculation. In this case, I'm going to be showing you a little bit of Python, and I don't want you to be afraid of other languages, because other languages, many times that might already be on the operating system, in the case of a Macintosh, are extremely powerful and very rewarding. Within the web viewer, we can actually use JavaScript in some cases. We can also use different plugins that provide hooks into other technologies. The 360works Scriptmaster plugin is a free plugin that provides you with access to Java, provided Java is installed on the machine. Now, in the case of Macintosh, you need to install an older version of Apple's Java 6 currently, even though Java is already up to Java 8. I don't know when 360works is going to update their plugin to support embedding a newer version of Java, but it's something that they desperately need to do. You also have a plugin called Bbox, which is from the folks over at Beeswax. That allows you to access native languages that are built into the Macintosh. Now, on Windows, they're not built in, but you can install them. And these languages include Python, very powerful, Ruby, also very powerful, and PHP, which is also accessible. So here in this little list, in this middle tab, what you're going to have is a number of links of resources that I actually use. Now, this first one, this Code Runner, is a Macintosh application that you can get for $14.99. That if you don't know anything about any other languages, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, PHP, if you're on a Mac and you simply want to play with and access these languages, I love this tool. It's perfect for writing little short scripts and snippets that will do things. In fact, I'll switch over to it now, and we're going to see the script that I actually used in order to grab the data off of the Wikipedia page, format it how I want to format it, and then put it into a CSV format. And it only took me about 30 to 45 minutes to write this script, and that's without actually knowing the module that I needed to load in order to make this happen super fast and extremely easy. If you're going to be working within the web viewer itself, then JSoup is a JavaScript, or not JavaScript, it's a Java jar library. It comes as a jar file, which is basically just a zip file that you can load using the Scriptmaster plugin. And I have another video on the magazine website that shows you how no matter what is loaded, whether it uses JavaScript or not, within a web viewer, you can actually extract the content out of that particular web page using JSoup and a Scriptmaster plugin right off the bat. I use this all the time in a lot of my own solutions because I'm always using web viewers that are going out to other websites, and I'm logging into those websites, and then I want to pull stuff off of those web pages from within the web viewer and have it go straight into FileMaker. Again, search on the magazine website and you will find my video about JSoup is what it's called. Now, I don't know why soup seems to be the term that they love to use, but the plugin that we're going to be using, or I should say the Python module that we're going to be using in this particular example that I'm going to show you here really quickly is Beautiful Soup. And in order to access Python, you need to use the Bbox plugin. So here I'll click on this link. Bbox, again, is a plugin. Unfortunately, it's Mac only, but you can create an agent machine if you need to. This allows you to access Python that's built into the Macintosh, and boy, is it powerful. The Beautiful Soup is a Python library that is not installed by default on your operating system, but I'm going to show you with 2 lines of code how easy it is to actually install. And it looks like this particular web page doesn't happen to be loading right now, but within this list I have a website called webscraping.com, which is very interesting, that has a lot of resources and information about web scraping. I have Phantom.js. If you are familiar with and like to use Node.js, Phantom.js will do a lot of things for you. There are so many technologies out there that anything that you see on the web, you can access. But without further ado, we're going to go into how easy it is to actually use Python on the Macintosh in order to extract and web scrape any single web page that you see on the web. Let's take a look. All right, we have finally arrived at the point that I'm so excited to show you, because this is what is so cool about using any type of hooks into external technologies to do things where FileMaker doesn't necessarily excel. And it also takes advantage of libraries that are created by developers across the world that you don't have to take a whole lot of time in order to get at the result that you want, as long as you're willing to say, I will go outside of FileMaker, whether that's using a plugin or using a new language like Python. Now, within 15 lines of code, that's actually including spaces. So in terms of true code, there's probably 15 minus 3 right here, or we're taking a look at 12 lines of code. I'm going to click this evaluate button, and what you're going to see appear right here is all of the 3-digit zip codes in a comma-separated format with the state, everything cleaned and ready to go, ready for me to paste right within FileMaker. And it only took those 12 lines of code. Absolutely amazing. Now, it does leverage technologies that you need to install. Obviously, the Bbox plugin if you're on a Macintosh, and you'll also need Python, an add-on of that Beautiful Soup extension. So over here, using my code runner, where I have a much longer version of my script, you'll notice that I can simply click Run. It will do the exact same thing, and what it did is that over here on my desktop, it created this file of import zip prefix data. I drag that on top of FileMaker. I say yes to the field names. I say OK, and we'll take off the word converted there. And there's my data right there, ready for me to use within FileMaker. And again, once you take the time to learn what I'm about to show you, getting at data off of the web is so fast that there's really nothing you can't parse, and you need to know this as a developer. So let's walk through a little bit of this Python code. I know it's not FileMaker, but my goal is to make you understand that going outside of FileMaker in many cases is much to your advantage. So first off, you can see that anything in other languages that leverages an external library has this thing known as importing. You're basically going to import whole subsets of functional code so that you can take advantage of those without having to write them yourself. It's the whole premise of open source and a lot of other technologies. So this very first line right here that basically says, from BS4, which stands for Beautiful Soup version 4, import Beautiful Soup. Now, Beautiful Soup is this whole library which allows us to simply parse all of what we read in from a URL. And that's what we're going to need to get into FileMaker. Into Python. So let me show you how we do that. So the first thing you need to know is that Python as it comes installed by default on the Macintosh is just bare bones Python. In fact, it's an older version called Python 2, when the newer version, Python 3, is predominantly used in your web applications and other things. But in no way is Python 2 incapable of doing pretty much anything and everything you could want to do. So you don't have to go out and install a new version of Python. It's already there on your Mac. But what's not installed are these libraries that we need in order to take advantage of all of this power, this work that's been done for us. So down at the bottom here, within these comments, you're going to see that there's two different commands. If you're on a Macintosh, the first thing is Easy Install is an application that's already installed on your Mac for installing extensions to Python. But we want to use something that's a little bit better called pip. So what we're going to do is this first command is what we would need to run. It's sudo, which means superuser do, easy_install pip. That's going to install an extension installer or a package manager. That's basically what they call it, is a package manager that allows you to install modules for a particular language. After we've installed that new package manager, we're then going to run as the superuser again. We're going to do superuser or sudo pip install Beautiful Soup 4. And what happens is it will go out onto the web and it will install it into the proper location so that you can use this within Python on your particular machine. Now, if you are going to use this on a server side, which you can perfectly do, the only thing you need to be aware of is the fact that the bbox plugin only works on a Macintosh. So of course your server would need to be a Macintosh, but once it's installed on a Macintosh server, it can do all of this stuff for you via perform script on server, and you don't have to install, update, or enhance Python on a local machine. However, if you're just web scraping to get data into FileMaker, no problem, do it on your own machine. So over here, I have a copy of terminal, and this is exactly what you would do. You would simply copy the command that we have right here, go over here, you would paste, and it would be sudo easy install pip, and then it would install. Then, after that's installed, you would then do sudo pip install Beautiful Soup 4, and that would install Beautiful Soup 4. Now, there is a particular script that I have in this database. It's in record number 1 that allows you to see what's installed in your version of Python. So in script number 1, we can see right here that I have a very quick little script that if I evaluate this into my result, we can see that it has a list of all of the different modules that my copy of Python has installed. Yours will too on your standard Mac. The only one that will be added is this Beautiful Soup 4, and I can see that I have 4.4.1, the most recent version as of the shooting of this video, installed. Once those two commands are installed, you now have one of the most powerful web scraping libraries in order to do whatever it is that you want to extract whatever you want, however you want. And this is how easy it is in the remaining lines of this script. Remember, again, we're just talking about 12 lines, and if you're willing to take the time to learn, it's pretty easy. Let's take a look. First off, I love Python because it's a very clean language. It doesn't have semicolons at the end, and it's very easy to read. So let's just read this. First, I have a URL, and I want to set it equal to this particular URL, my Wikipedia URL. Simple. The cool thing is, in Python, you can use either single or double quotes. In FileMaker, you only use double quotes. Next, I need to get that data, all of the data which is the HTML. So I'm using the URL lib. Now up at the top, we can see this import. Python by itself doesn't do anything automatically except for maybe your basic math. So you need to load in libraries, many of which are installed by default as part of Python, in order to do things. URL lib is one that allows you to interact and work with URLs. Everything that's on the web. String allows you to deal with strings. CSV allows you to deal with comma-separated values, which in this context, directly within FileMaker, is not used, but I did use it in my original script. Sys and OS deal with system and operating system things. You can see that in an example of my full script where I get the path to the desktop. Unicode Data. This is one that you need to be aware of when you're working with Python and many other languages. When you pull information, depending on how it's pulled, it can be pulled in a format where that information is represented using an encoding format. For example, you'll have something like a backslash or an X0 54 or whatever. These are basically just codes that represent characters that can't be stored because not everything represents, or not everything can store data in the representation that a font uses in order to render Unicode data. So we're going to deal with that a little bit. So these are things you don't necessarily have to pay too much attention to other than the functions or the methods that I actually point out. Here is the magic that makes it all happen. Because we loaded that beautiful soup library, we're going to say we want soup to be equal to a beautiful soup, which is basically parsing the HTML that we read into data, and we're going to use a particular parser. There's a parser that's built in, and it's an HTML standard parser. We really don't need anything else for this particular example, but just know that you can parse XML and there are other HTML parsers that are either faster or more comprehensive. The built-in one in this case, just fine. Next thing, and if you haven't already noticed, this is basically just like defining a let variable. There's nothing magic here about this language other than the fact that we don't have to have semicolons, and we need to learn just a little bit, but the documentation is all there for you. So here we're going to say parsed is going to be equal to whatever soup is, and in this case, soup is our parsed data. We want to find all what elements? TDs, which are table data tags within the HTML. So that's it. This one variable just pulled in all of those TDs on that page for me. The rest of what I need to do is simply walk across all of those TDs that I found, all of those individual data cells, and do whatever I want with them. So here again is where Python shines. Python works on an indentation rule. So in other words, this right here is a for loop, just like a loop we have within FileMaker. But everything indented underneath this line is going to do what I want according to the loop. So I'm saying for TD, which is a new variable that I'm defining, I'm saying for this variable that I'm making up called TD, in the content that I have within parsed, which parsed, as we already know, found all of my TD tags, is simply going to say, what do you want out of all of this data? Well, I know that each item is going to be a row. And what I want you to look at is I want you to look at that TD tag, and I want you to get the bold tag. Now, how and where did I find out about this bold tag and this A tag? The interesting thing is that the way that Beautiful Soup works is it just works based on the straight up HTML tags. So all you have to do is be willing to look at the HTML to find out how the data is structured. So this is a good point to zoom out, switch back over to my browser, and go take a look at a particular item. Let's go take a look at our 000 here, or one that might make more sense that does have an actual state. I'm going to right-click here on this, choose Inspect Element. That's going to bring this up, and we can see right here as we zoom in everything that's going to match within our Python script. So we have our TD tag, and we already grabbed all of those into our variable called parsed. Well, here is a B tag. So that's what I want, TD, then there's my B. I can see that B is going to have my value right there of 010, but within that B tag, they've embedded this A tag, and within the A tag, there's the value that I want right there, the MA. So as long as I'm willing to look at the structure of the HTML, back here in FileMaker, everything will start to make sense. So as I zoom in, we have my row. That's getting the TD tag, which is right here, which is simply cycling through each of the parsed TD items. I want to get the bold tag. Now I'm grabbing all of the bold tag. That's inclusive of the anchor tag that's embedded within the bold tag. And that just happens to be how they structured the data. But you know what? I don't care how they structured the data. What I care is the fact that it's in a recognizable, repeatable pattern across all of the individual items. So here I'm just going to grab the prefix, and this one's probably the most complex line. Off of my row, which the row happens to be the bold tag, inclusive of what's embedded, I want you to grab the whole contents. Now, contents is a method that's within the Beautiful Soup library that says, I want you to grab all of this and put it in an array. In that array, the first value is going to be that individual ID, or the 3-digit prefix. I want you to then use the method to convert that into a string, and I know that some of those strings actually have an extra space. That just happened to be the way that they're entering the data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace that space, just like FileMaker substitute, with nothing. And finally, because I know some of those values have encoded higher ASCII characters, I need to actually get rid of them. So I'm going to use this .encode, and I'm going to convert it into ASCII, and I'm going to ignore any Unicode characters. Unicode characters are those characters that are above the standard ASCII set that basically are like the little cross and little symbols that you need to represent when you're showing data that's above the ASCII 128 or however many there are. Next, I want to grab the state. So I already have the prefix now. Now I want to grab the state. Again, I'm going to look at that same row, which the row is that bold tag, but remember, embedded within that bold tag is an anchor tag. So within the row, I want to look at the anchor. I want to convert that into a string and do the exact same thing that I did, encode it into ASCII and ignore any of those higher characters. And that's because I really don't need those. Now, in this case, we do have a little bit more complex code because what we're doing is we have this as an inline if statement. So rather than having this go across multiple lines, if this, then that, I'm doing it all on one line, which you can do in Python and many other languages. If the row A is not none, then this is what's going to be returned, my actual string. Now, it so happens that in all of this data, there are some of these items, some of these TD rows within the bold tag that do not have any items. Well, I need to account for that because it's not going to return anything. It'll actually return an error within Python. So I need to actually do an if right here that says if the row anchor tag is none, or if it's not equal to none, then it's going to return this result. Otherwise, we're going to return an empty value. So that's a little bit difficult to read, but once you're able to read Python, it's like any other language, it's just a new syntax. Finally, for each of these TDs, we are simply going to print the prefix concatenated with, FileMaker uses the ampersand, Python simply uses the plus, so does JavaScript, a comma, and the state. This is the line that's actually creating the output, but as you can see, on screen here, I can highlight almost, aside from the one line that's up here up at the top that's hidden, all of the lines that allow me to parse this data so masterfully that with a click of a button, I get all of the data from the web page right into FileMaker and ready to parse. And the cool thing is that the Bbox plugin and the Scriptmaster plugin, these plugins allow you to also call FileMaker scripts. So if I wanted to, straight from this code, I would be able to actually just call and rip the data off of the web and push it straight into FileMaker tables. Not always the most efficient when you're dealing with a lot of data, but for very simple scrapes, it's a very cool way to go. Now, the last thing that I'm going to leave you with in this video is how you actually execute the Python code using the Bbox plugin, and I have it all embedded very easily and simply directly within a single step on this button. Let's take a look. Going into layout mode and double-clicking on the button, we can see that it is very clearly set for a single step, and I'm setting a field. That's this field right here, my result, and this is all of the code that you need to know about in order to run any Python script using the Bbox plugin. So as I zoom in here, the first thing that you need to do is you need to have your Python script. So here we're using a let function and we're saying, I want you to compile. That just happens to match the name that the Bbox developer chose to use. This Bbox Python compile is my script. Now they have this funky attribute or this parameter that is mode. And so we have to put a 0 here. It's a 0 in a lot of the different functions. But essentially, I'm simply just referencing my FileMaker script field, which is that Python script. Now, I'm not using any FileMaker input, but I left this here so that you get an idea that if there's FileMaker data that you want to integrate into a Python script, you're going to use this function of bbox python set var. That var can be named anything, which is the name is right here, and it can then reference any FileMaker data that you want. It can be a field, it can be a variable, it can be a global variable. Anything FileMaker can be right here, and that can get injected or pulled into your actual script, which is really pretty cool. Once it's gone through the compile and you've set the variables, everything that you need is all right there. We simply need to execute. So I've set my variable of result to the bbox python execute. Finally, if there was a problem with the Python script, we need to get that. So I've set a variable of error to the bbox last error. And then finally, bbox actually calls Python and runs it as a very quick VM, or a virtual machine in essence. Creating that instance, you typically want to shut that down. And so you can call the Python finalize function in order to close that out. And finally, my result here is really pretty simple. If I get a question mark result, which is what FileMaker often returns when something isn't actually discovered, then we're going to give it whatever happened as a result of the last error function. The -3 here is the representation for a Python error, where -2 and -1 and -0 are for the different languages that the bbox plugin supports, which is Ruby, maybe PHP, I forget. But otherwise, return my result. And that's it. You can copy and paste this on a single step button or use it with any script anywhere, anytime that you want to run any type of Python script. It is that simple to get into FileMaker. Just this amount of code in order to run whatever Python script you want to run, and then this amount of code right here in order to parse this particular page. Remember, whatever page you're going to parse, you have to look at the HTML in order to dissect it, in order to know how to get at what you want. But with what I've provided you with here, getting pretty much anything that you want off of the web into FileMaker is a very simple process. All right, so I hope throughout the course of this video, you've been able to get a better sense of what type of web scraping you can do within FileMaker, but then with whatever FileMaker can't do, how easy it is to go just a step outside and be able to get massive power in terms of parsing whatever it is that you want to parse. Before I close this video out, I'm going to mention that the script that I have over here on the side, which actually has a function that will create a comma-separated value writer function, and then actually include the desktop path and an output and all of that, and then write all of the data out. This is the longer version of my script. What I've done is you will find that in the sample file. So if you go into layout mode on the file, on the non-visible portion of the layout, you will find this little block of code, and that is the script that you're able to take into a copy of Code Runner or a standard text editor, and then be able to run that on the command line if you're familiar with that. But however you actually decide to run this, I have now given you the code, the time savings, the knowledge, and the wonderful good feeling about how easy it is to parse whatever you want off of the web, doing some web scraping directly into FileMaker. So as with all things, I wish you much luck with your own FileMaker database, and until next time, happy FileMaking. We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.